Hello. Thank you for inviting me into your home once more. I thought I would treat you to a peek into a little known and oft overlooked BBC anthology series. With only one episode surviving in the archives and the rest wiped, this has proven difficult to review the episodes with virtually no visuals. This meant that I have had to rely solely on creativity where possibly I can, but I do like a challenge. On today's programme, the series under review is Late Night Horror, the first BBC drama series to be filmed in colour, and a tricky review for Look, Look and Look Again. But I sincerely hope you enjoy it. Ah, dear viewer, the joys of late 1960s colour TV. How groovy that must have been.
And we shall be back at Royal Birkdale for the Alcan Golfer of the Year Championships later in the year. Just before the World Skating Championships, here's a warning from an old friend about something that's going to happen on BBC Two later tonight.
Good evening. Perhaps you remember me, the man in black. I'm here tonight to give you a friendly warning. Do you feel frightened of the dark? Squeamish about blood? Do you, who live alone, sometimes feel that your hairbrush is not quite where you left it on your dressing table? Do you sometimes feel that the trees in a dark wood are not wholly on your side? And you, madam, do you feel that bats are constantly conspiring to secure lodgment in your hair? If you do, I would strongly advise you, as a friend, to avoid this channel late on Fridays for the next few weeks. You see, they're starting a series, a most unpleasant series. Perhaps you're laughing. Perhaps you think you are above being frightened by a television program. In that case, why not switch on BBC Two at 10:55 tonight? Turn out the lights and watch Late Night Horror. But please, don't watch it alone. You never know what might be looking over your shoulder.
So don't say you haven't been warned.
Due to the BBC's infamous junking of its back catalogue, diving into the forgotten corners of late 60s television in colour can be a daunting task, especially when there's bugger all. Many productions have sunk into near total obscurity, but some still shine through the fog of time, deserving more than just a cursory glance. Late Night Horror, a prime example of such a gem, aired briefly in 1968, but its impact lingers. Sadly, the series' 6 25-minute plays became early victims of the BBC's archival purging.
A videotape. On it, a recording of a play, sound and vision, costing thousands to produce and now wiped. Gone forever. Lost.
Despite their historical importance as some of the first BBC dramas to be recorded in colour. As a result, references to late night horror are scarce indeed. However, enough documentation survives, bolstered by director Paddy Russell's invaluable insights, to offer a glimpse into its fascinating legacy. The series was conceived by producer Harry Moore, known for his previous success with the short stories of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which aired on the BBC in 1967. This anthology series, another junked one, had brought to life the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He wasn't a one-trick pony, was Conan Doyle, exclusive to just the deerstalker, magnifying glass and heroin addiction. His other stories often touch on his penchant for the supernatural and the eerie. One standout episode of the series, Lot 249, made an early, memorable use of classic Egyptian mummy lore, while The Brown Hand, something we all suffer from with cheap toilet paper and playing with fire, these continued the tradition of unsettling ghostly tales and seance horror. Late night horror can be viewed as a natural progression from Moore's earlier work with Conan Doyle, drawing on 6 short stories from the horror genre, some familiar, others obscure. While it included another Conan Doyle tale, the series also embraced lesser-known work. The series offered a more cerebral form of terror, despite the somewhat sensational retitling of many of its episodes. One of the few constants across the series was its eerie title sequence, paired with an atmospheric theme from the BBC Radiophonic Workshop and haunting visual graphics by Charles McGee. Promoting the new series in Radio Times, producer Harry Moore sought to distance late-night horror from the typical Frankenstein's monster style of horror that dominated popular culture in 1968, at a time when Hammer's gothic creations filled cinema screens. Moore aimed to show how horror could arise from the most ordinary, even mundane situations, an idea that was not new, but one that had been sorely overlooked on TV. While a few episodes did indeed venture into the darker recesses of classic supernatural horror, others defied expectations. No Such Thing as a Vampire, The Triumph of Death, and The Kiss of Blood were all period pieces steeped in rich atmospheric tension, dripping with familiar supernatural themes. Meanwhile, Roald Dahl's William and Mary leaned into black comedy with a sinister twist, leaving only The Bells of Hell and The Corpse Can't Play to truly reimagine the genre. Despite these variances, the production credentials were nothing short of stellar. The series came to life in the summer of '67 with scripts penned by UK TV heavyweights such as Hugh Leonard, David Campton, John Hawksworth and Hugh Whitemore, and even Roald Dahl contributed his own story. Directors like Rudolph Cartier brought their own artistic flair, while performances from actors like Andrew Keir, Claire Bloom, Brenda Bruce and Roy Dotrice added weight to the chilling narratives. Filming began in September of 1967, during a period when BBC Two's colour broadcasts were still a fledgling experiment. The official debut came in December of that year. By the time Late Night Horror aired in the April of '68, the channel's audience had begun to expand, but only a fortunate few would have experienced the series in colour. The transition to colour on BBC One in November of '69 led to a delayed rerun of the plays, stretching into early 1970, with the story The Bells of Hell airing first on December the 5th, 1969. By the mid-1970s, the master tapes had vanished, and with them, late night horror seemed destined to fade into obscurity. Now, with the backdrop of its creation in mind, let's peer into the shadows and explore the stories that made late night horror a uniquely haunting anthology. In a secluded Eastern European village at the turn of the century, the quiet of Dr. Peter Guignol's home is shattered by the blood-curdling scream of his wife Alexis. Rushing to her side, Guignol finds 2 small puncture wounds on her neck, slowly oozing blood. The housemaid and butler, gripped by terror, whisper of the undead, nightmarish creatures that feast on the blood of the living. But Guignol dismisses these fears as mere superstition, determined to find a rational explanation. He insists there is no such thing as a vampire. However, when Dr. Michael Verres, a close friend of Guignol, arrives, a brief moment of comfort is shattered as Alexis's condition worsens. As her health declines rapidly, Guignol finds himself torn between reason and the growing panic of his staff. With time running out, the line between science and superstition blurs. Guignol decides to set up a vigil with Verres and play a game of chess as they watch over Alexis to safeguard her from further harm. But is this creature of the undead real, or is the true horror something far more human? No Such Thing as a Vampire sprang from the creative mind of Richard Matheson, the legendary author of I Am Legend. It first graced the pages of Playboy magazine in 1959, back when short stories were perfectly at home and nestled between the glossy spreads of boobies. By 1968, Matheson was no stranger to the big screen. His story, The Shrinking Man, had already morphed into The Incredible Shrinking Man in 1957, and I Am Legend would soon become The Last Man on Earth in 1964. In No Such Thing as a Vampire, Matheson weaves a clever twist into his usual bag of storytelling tricks, blending old-world superstition with a sharp edge of modern science. The result? A tale where fear, jealousy, and cunning collide. Drawing on the deep-seated terrors of peasant folklore, he crafts a chilling, calculated revenge plot that unfolds with meticulous precision from the outset. Hugh Leonard, the scriptwriter, seized this tightly wound gem and transforms it into a television script that not only stays true to Matheson's vision, but also fleshes out the story in ways that feel both natural and satisfying. By the time he tackled this project, Leonard had already cemented his reputation as both a gifted original writer and a deft adapter, particularly in his work for the BBC. His talents hadn't gone unnoticed by director Paddy Russell, who had long admired Leonard's ability to bring stories to life. Together they ensured that No Such Thing as a Vampire transitioned from page to screen with both flair and fidelity. Director Paddy Russell recollected that,
"I always worked closely with the writers. Script editors hated me as a rule. Hugh Leonard and I clicked right from the word go. As I recall, Hugh came along to the rehearsals of the late-night horror plays, and nobody else got a look in."
In mid-September of 1967, rehearsals and recording for the production were in full swing. Back then, studio productions operated like finely tuned machines, typically running with minimal recording breaks to keep things smooth and efficient. But for director Paddy Russell, navigating the brave new world of colour technology added an entirely new layer of complexity. This wasn't just a shift in visuals, it meant rethinking workflows, adjusting to technical demands, and solving problems that had never cropped up in the era of monochrome. It was uncharted territory, and Russell had to learn on the hoof. She said that,
"Having come from live television, I always recorded in sequence, with as few breaks as possible. Not only did this keep the expensive editing down, but I also felt it gave an edge to the performances. With No Such Thing as a Vampire, however, the frequent stops, to adjust the color balance, made it all the more difficult for the cast to get up to pitch again. I also recall an inordinately long camera lineup at the beginning, 90 minutes I think it was. I had experience of working with a wide range of actors. However, I did tend to cast those I would find responsive, Andrew Keir being a good case in point. Andrew was one of what were then known as Russell's reps. Actors I could rely on to flesh out a character, even when the script was quite short. For this particular play, for example, it was important to keep the identity of the vampire a complete secret until the very end.
Paddy Russell often looked back on the series as a prime example of how you didn't need a bottomless budget to make compelling coloured television. For the Matheson story, things were kept refreshingly simple. Beyond a brief stock shot of the sun rising near the end, the production relied on just a handful of studio sets. Most of the action unfolded in a single location, the main bedroom of the Geirier household. A massive four-poster bed took centre stage, dominating the studio floor. Russell admitted it wasn't all smooth sailing though. This oversized piece of furniture caused its fair share of headaches during camera rehearsals, proving that even small productions could come with their own unique challenges. She said that
Meg Owen, who played Alexis, said it was by far the most comfortable part she ever played. It was, however, not an easy play to shoot because of this huge four-poster structure. In the end, I had to come to a compromise with the designer, never a really satisfactory solution. Having come to directing from the studio floor, I always had an active sense of what would and would not work. I'd still alter shots during recording, however, sometimes the cameraman might have had a better idea, a different angle.
despite this story being the first, or one of the first, television colour productions adapted from the pen of a prestigious author such as Matheson, There's No Such Thing as a Vampire got repeated once more on BBC One, but shortly after this, No Such Thing as a Vampire was wiped and remains to be irretrievably lost, part of the BBC's ludicrous junking policy and sheer lack of foresight. I'm sure you agree with me, dear viewer. It's a great, great shame. After her husband William's death, Mary receives a letter detailing a bizarre and secret experiment he had arranged before his passing. Through the twisted ingenuity of science, William has achieved a grotesque form of existence, one that forces Mary to confront William's unsettling legacy of control and cold logic he wielded over her in life. As Mary faces this disturbing revelation and recalls the tyranny she had endured for so long, the balance of power can now shift in a darkly poetic way. Roald Dahl's most darkly comic gems, William and Mary, first saw the light of day in the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction way back in the March of 1959. Later it was included in Dahl's 1960 short story collection Kiss Kiss, where it joined a roster of other deliciously wicked tales. Now, William and Mary didn't just stay confined to the pages, of course. It found a new lease of life through multiple television adaptations. For late-night horror, it was presented for the first time in glorious colour, though finding a copy of this version might be trickier than tracking down the Holy Grail. Thankfully, a more accessible take arrived in 1979 as part of TV anthology series Tales of the Unexpected. Can you remember those episodes, dear viewer, that kept us enthralled on a Saturday or Sunday night? Wonderful stuff it was too. The beauty of this story for TV producers is it's practically a bargain. A small cast, minimal sets and effects meant It could deliver maximum chills without emptying anyone's wallet.
This is basically a very nasty tale. But if I've managed to learn one thing in my 35 years of story writing, it is this. Nastiness and horror must be handled with great circumspection, because if left on their own, they will always taste bitter in the end. But if humor is added to the mixture, then the tension is relieved by laughter, and the bitterness is banished.
But the drama didn't just stop in front of the lens, as it went on behind the scenes too. You see, Dahl himself had dramatised the story, and negotiations over fees nearly derailed the whole production. Adding to the tension, Dahl insisted it could only be aired the once. Eventually the BBC and Dahl reached a compromise, a single repeat, but only if it happened within 2 years of the original broadcast, which it did. And overseas rights off the table entirely, limiting its chances of a copy existing even on black and white film out there somewhere. Casting had its share of twists too. The role of Dr. Landy was initially offered to actor Michael Bryant, but for reasons shrouded in mystery, it ended up going to Donald Sinden. If that name rings a bell, you might know him from the sitcoms Never the Twain and Two's Company, where he starred opposite Elaine Stritch. Funny enough, Stritch herself has a connection here. She played Mary Pearl in the Tales of the Unexpected adaptation of this very story. It's a bit of a tenuous link, dear viewer, but I couldn't resist sharing it with you. Of William and Mary, Sinden said that
sympathy is all with the wife, Mrs. Pearl. In the first part of the play, the professor, Mary's husband, played by Andre van Gysegem, is still alive, and you see him treating her appallingly. So when she comes to see the macabre remains, she takes her revenge by smoking in front of the eye. The one thing that used to infuriate the professor, and in a final act of defiance, she blows smoke straight into it.
The lead part of Mary Pearl went to actress Brenda Bruce. Prior to this, Bruce had already cropped up in the controversial Peeping Tom in 1960, where she played a whore, and Hammer's Nightmare in 1964. Bruce was a fantastic character actress with a leonine face, sporting eyebrows that arched with such precision they could have been trained in semaphore. For the soundtrack, composer Tristram Carey, known to you fans of Doctor Who, provided the radiophonic shudders. Carey recalled that
the music for William and Mary contains a lot of gurgling and choking sounds, which was me, of course. I was after something repellent and disgusting, without going so far as to make them faint at the BBC.
Despite viewing figures being less for this story than No Such Thing as a Vampire, the critics rather enjoyed it, ranging from calling it a gruesome dramatisation, and one mentioning that the story had remained in the mind long after the teleplay had finished, something, unfortunately, we won't be able to see. Unfortunately, this is another casualty of the BBC's junking policy. Tristram Carey's incidental music, however, is fortunately still retained by his private estate. And he is glad he did retain it, as he knew full well how the BBC worked back then, and commented that
I'm not surprised that no trace remains of the play in BBC archives. They are great losers and destroyers. That is why I always made sure that the first thing I did, with a tape from my studio, was to get them to make a copy and work from that. I also ensured that they returned the master to me, before some busybody stamped a BBC number on it. If you let it get that far, it was probably goodbye.
Alas for the play, it was sayonara, now lost in time, and it's very, very doubtful it will ever be seen again. With the next episode, we were luckier. In the seemingly cheerful chaos of a suburban birthday party, the fragile veneer of normalcy begins to crack. Alice Jarman, frazzled and overwhelmed, tries desperately to control the horde of unruly children, their games devolving into chaos. Her husband Tom, her lifeline, is late, and Alice's nerves unravel further amidst the clatter of slamming doors and the cacophony of juvenile voices. Amidst this disarray, Simon Potter, a quiet, uninvited boy, arrives, bearing a gift far too grand for his meagre welcome. Ronnie, the birthday boy, seizes the opportunity to mock Simon's orphaned status, his cruel taunts orchestrating a symphony of humiliation as the other children jeer, and then Ronnie suggests a new game: murder. The house descends into eerie shadows as the children scatter for hiding places. Ronnie feigns kindness, guiding Simon to a linen cupboard, then shoves him inside, locking the door. The game reaches its climax as Ronnie gleefully reveals the corpse's grotesque remains: a clump of hair, a severed hand, an eyeball, props for their gruesome charade. But the children's laughter curdles into screams as the macabre truth is unveiled. The Corpse Can't Play was adapted from John Burke's 1965 short story Party Games. Burke, a prolific British writer, wasn't just known for his original tales. He made a name for himself crafting tie-in novels for iconic genre films, including Dr. Terror's House of Horrors and the Hammer Horror Omnibus volumes. He also wrote Terror for Kicks, the basis for the hauntingly effective late 60s horror film The Sorcerers. Party Games originally appeared in the 6th Pan Book of Horror Stories in 1965 and became one of Burke's standout pieces. Beyond his fiction, he was a celebrated editor of anthologies, notably the Tales of Unease TV series, and contributed scripts to suspenseful TV classics like The Frighteners. Burke here often explored the unsettling contrast between childhood innocence and murderous intent, a theme seen in literary classics like William Golding's Lord of the Flies or M.R. James' ghostly revenge tale Lost Hearts. Hugh Leonard's adaptation of Party Games, retitled The Corpse Can't Play for the late-night horror, brings John Burke's chilling tale to life with sharp writing and intense atmosphere. Leonard remains faithful to the claustrophobia and tension of the original story, yet his version delivers an even more unsettling climax that few viewers at the time were likely prepared for. In Burke's story, we experience the events through Alice's perspective as she listens to mysterious bangs, thuds and screams from the sanctuary of the kitchen, left to piece together the horrors unfolding among the children. Leonard, however, in his adaptation, takes a different approach, giving us a stark, unflinching look at Ronnie's cruel treatment of Simon, while the adults remain disturbingly oblivious. To aid the adaptation, Leonard introduces Joanna, Alice's friend, who serves as a sounding board for Alice's growing unease and helps deepen the adult's sense of detachment from the children's increasingly sinister games. Originally offered to director Naomi Capon, the project was ultimately helmed by Paddy Russell, who brought a methodical approach to the shoot. Russell recorded much of the play in chronological order, though the shocking denouement was filmed first to set the tone for this grimly effective piece. The cast featured seasoned performers, including Neil Hallett, known for roles in The Avengers and other TV classics. Claire Austen took on the role of the frazzled Alice, bringing depth to her character. Before this, she appeared in Kenneth Cavender's R3 episode, It's Better to Know. R3 was a forerunner to the glorious Doomwatch series, Another series, though, a casualty of the Junking from the BBC, R3 starred a very young Oliver Reed. As Alice's confidant Joanna, Christine Pollen delivered a standout performance. Pollen had early success in The Avengers, appearing in the 1961 episode The Radioactive Man, and later became widely recognised as Aunt Gwyneth in the beloved The Duchess of Duke Street, Gawblahmy Governor. These seasoned actors added a layer of authenticity and nuance to The Corpse Can't Play, making the chilling drama even more unforgettable. However, director Patty Russell recalls a few hurdles casting the younger members of the cast. She said that,
"It was all set at a kid's birthday party, and you know what they say about working with children. It was the classic story of the uninvited and unwanted guest. He came bearing gifts, however, so Mum, Claire Austin, insisted that he stay. The other kids ostracized him, until hide and seek was suggested with variations. I remember that for the play we approached all the theatrical schools for suggestions, and I auditioned the most likely candidates. The BBC didn't have casting directors in those days, just booking assistants who would put up ideas if asked. Under these circumstances I used to read with the actors, and I felt I could tell a lot from their direct responses once I got them to relax. The only real problem I recall were the restricted hours that children were allowed to work."
The Corpse Can't Play generated the most complaints from the stories in the series. One viewer was left disturbed and so put pen to paper, which featured in the Radio Times, the BBC's propaganda TV listing magazine, and said he found it all to be
distasteful and unredeemed by literary merit,
and added that he was
at a loss to understand the attitude of those responsible, both at the BBC and the parents concerned, in allowing young children to participate as actors.
Harry Moore, the producer, responded by saying,
"If the letter writer is a parent, as I am, he should be aware of the horror games children choose to play. As such games are created by children themselves, they must have a need to express themselves in a horrific way. That they are involved as actors in a story is one way for them to express that need. How many times has one's child, in a state of extreme frustration, said, 'I'll kill you'? The intent, of course, is not there, but the need is. So he expresses it in words and, having done so, feels better for it. The children, as professional actors, are dealing with a fictional situation. If they do not act such situations out on TV, they will make them up in our back gardens."
Moore concluded in a lighter tone that during rehearsals some of the things the child actors suggested were ideas far more horrific than what was broadcast, and concluded that such ideas
I could never have considered.
Good news, dear viewer. Back in 1984, a lucky film collector stumbled upon a list of treasures up for private sale. Among them was a 16mm black and white print of The Corpse Can't Play. An attempt was made to snatch it up, but alas, at the very last moment, someone else beat them to it. Gutted doesn't even begin to describe the disappointment. Fast forward, though, to 2016, and the print resurfaced online like a long-lost treasure. This time, Kaleidoscope, the fantastic classic TV organisation, swooped in to secure it. Although a small part of the end credits was missing, they worked their magic. Using a clever chroma dot recovery process, they not only repaired the print, but also restored it to its original, glorious colour. Trust me, dear viewer, it's an absolute gem and a total must-see. The restored episode truly shows us why this classic stirred up so much controversy in the first place. It is first-rate horror of the most disturbing kind.
Tom, here's the corpse's hair. Pass it around. And here's the corpse's hand. Pass it on. Shh. And here's the corpse's eyebrow.
Now then, Ronnie, I've given you all the time that I'm going to, understand?
In the decaying halls of Carthwaite House, young Amelia is a consumptive shadow of herself, forced to read aloud tales of Gilles de Rais, of his vile, child-slaughtering abattoir, for the amusement of a cruel mistress, a Miss Pendulum. The old woman, last of a cursed lineage, takes delight in Amelia's terror, recounting her ancestors' own grim rituals within these very walls, where children's lives were sacrificed in blood-soaked ceremonies. Amelia's nights are haunted by visions, bloodied faces, phantom cries, and shadows wielding knives, while Miss Pendulum mocks her unravelling sanity. The house itself seems alive with malice, the tapestry of the triumph of death looming like an omen over the occupants. When Amelia is sent upstairs, the walls come alive with bloodied handprints, and crepuscular corners echo ghostly whispers, and Amelia's grip on reality crumbles. But Miss Pendulum watches with a sadistic smile until distant screams signal that the house's dark hunger may finally claim yet another victim. The triumph of death seemingly delivers a chilling slice of pure nihilistic gothic horror, of that I'm sure. Those fortunate enough to have seen the episode firsthand often recall its haunting imagery. Tiny bloodied handprints mysteriously appearing on the walls of the mansion, eerie shadows of children flickering in the dim light, and the unsettling sound of the distant cries of pain echoing through the mansion. Alas, Triumph of Death, like so many of the episodes in late-night horror, is another casualty of the BBC Junking purge, never to be seen again after its second repeat. Written by H.R. Wakefield, and unlike the enduring fame of M.R. James's adaptations, Wakefield's ghost stories have been surprisingly rare. It's a pity, really, because his work, though less celebrated, is no less compelling. Despite his steady output spanning over 3 decades, Wakefield's stories languished in relative obscurity for years, with his 7 collections rarely reprinted and quite difficult to find. Still, Wakefield carved out his place as one of the most imaginative voices in ghostly fiction. Emerging in the late 1920s, he was among the talented authors who revived the English ghost story after the hiatus brought about by World War I. While some critics have dismissed him as a mere imitator of M.R. James, this label sells him a bit short. Yes, his stories share that quintessentially English charm with their atmospheric settings and sharply drawn characters, but Wakefield's elegant prose and inventive storytelling stand proudly on their own merit. Wakefield's final collection, Strayers from Sheol in 1961, published shortly before his death, includes this, considered to be one of his finest works. The Triumph of Death was written in 1949. It's an eerie period piece showcasing Wakefield's flair for the macabre, and is considered one of his most haunting tales. The late-night horror series took on this story in a rare departure from its usual anti-Gothic stance, and what a departure it was. Set in the shadowy halls of a dark claustrophobic mansion, complete with ghostly screams and blood-streaked faces, this episode fully embraced the Gothic horror aesthetic. Critics at the time described it as a haunted house and sobbing wind job, a bit dismissive perhaps, but the drama delivered a chilling tale of vengeful spirits pursuing their own brand of justice. The adaptation came courtesy of David Campton, a brilliant yet underappreciated television writer of the 60s and 70s. Campton's knack for crafting unsettling stories was already well established. He adapted Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher for Mystery and Imagination in 1966, starring Susanna York.
I know why you've come. You brought that knife for me. Do you hate me so much? Once you loved me. Years ago. We were children then. When Father was unkind to you, you would come to me for protection. Come to me now. You may keep your knife. You are safe with me. That is why you must stay with me.
Go quickly before...
If you ever loved me...
I hate you.
If you hate me so much, why don't you kill me? You have the knife in your hand. One stroke here, and the thing you hate will be dead.
His take on the triumph of death remained faithful to Wakefield's original vision, bringing this gothic gem vividly to life on the small screen. The Triumph of Death was directed by Rudolph Cartier. By the time he tackled this eerie tale, Cartier was already a celebrated figure at the BBC with a stellar 15-year career. The Triumph of Death offered Cartier another chance to work his magic for television, this time with a cast that brought the chilling story vividly to life. Leading the charge was a brilliant Claire Bloom as Amelia Lornan. Bloom perfectly embodied the fragile and haunted woman Wakefield described as being consumed by a devouring internal parasite. Bloom was no stranger to the gothic or the ghostly. She had worked with Cartier before in Anna Karenina and Wuthering Heights, and she shone in the iconic 1963 film The Haunting, based on Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. Joining Bloom was Nora Nicholson, a veteran actress best remembered as part of the acclaimed cast of the Forsyte saga. Here she brought to life the twisted spinster Miss Pendulum. Robert James rounded out the core cast as Redvale, the troubled rector. James was a familiar face in genre favourites for programmes like Doctor Who, The Avengers and Out of the Unknown. Cartier's attention to detail was quite remarkable, using pre-recorded inserts to amplify the horror. These included Amelia's flashbacks of her unsettling experiences at the rectory, complete with the bloodied face of a young boy, shots of an oil lamp bursting into flames, and distorted corridor visuals. The reviews were favourable, with some commenting that this instalment was the scariest so far, and championing Bloom's stellar portrayal of the ill-fated Amelia character. The story was broadcast again on BBC One in the January of 1970, the only and last ever time it was seen. Now, viewers, there remains a modicum of hope with this story, with regards to it existing in the archives. Concerning its existence, way back in the summer of '93, an article in Timescreen magazine, a publication celebrating the golden age of retro TV, it was in issue 7 where it was mentioned that a 16mm monochrome telerecording of the play was held in the National Film and Television Archives, the NFTVA. For a brief moment, it seemed like this chilling piece of television history had survived. But alas, hopes were dashed when it was later confirmed that the NFTVA had never actually housed a copy of the production. So where did this information come from? It turns out the Timescreen article had based its claim on reports of a possible screening of a late-night horror episode at a wider television access meeting in the late 1980s. The wider television access, or WTA meetings, were fascinating events held in libraries, cinemas and other venues, showcasing all sorts of archive television gems. However, no one has ever been able to positively identify the mysterious 16mm print supposedly shown at one of these gatherings. Could it have been the Triumph of Death? We may never know, but it adds yet another layer of mystery to this elusive production. I'd have loved to have seen this production, apparently heavy on atmosphere, and even more so on decaying dread. Research indicates that this was a truly grim little offering, which may have genuinely shit you up if you watched it with the lights off. 3 months into their marriage, Gerald and Fryn Banstead make their way to the Bell Inn, a seemingly idyllic pub nestled in the shadowy heart of East Anglia. But as they approach, an unsettling stillness cloaks the village. The streets lie deserted, empty of life or movement. The only sound piercing the silence is the mournful tolling of a church bell, its echo lingering like a funereal dirge. Inside the inn, the air is heavy with unease. Mr. and Mrs. Pascoe, the innkeepers, wear faces lined with fear, their every glance betraying a terror they refuse to name. The only other guest, the enigmatic Commander Shotcroft, is equally haunted, his uneasiness veiled beneath a thin layer of forced bravado. Something is deeply, horribly wrong in this place, though no one dares to speak it aloud. The Bansteads, drawn into this cocoon of dread, can feel it closing in around them. The bells keep ringing, their chilling resonance hinting at secrets buried deep and horrors waiting to rise. For soon the living and the dead will dance together. Now's the time, the place, the weather. The Bells of Hell is based on Robert Aikman's short story Ringing the Changes. It is a contemporary folk horror wallowing in ambiguity and decay with sexually charged undertones. Robert Aikman's Ringing the Changes, first published in 1955 in the third volume of Cynthia Asquith's celebrated The Ghost Book collections, stands as one of his most iconic tales. Over time, it has cemented its place as a classic, frequently featured in anthologies of modern ghost stories. Aikman, who lived from 1913 to 1981, made his mark with the 1951 collection We Are for the Dark, 6 ghost stories, which also included contributions from Elizabeth Jane Howard. Aikman himself was quick to reject the traditional ghost story label for his work. Instead, he preferred the term strange tales, which better captures the unsettling, enigmatic nature of his narratives. His stories often linger in ambiguity, much like the works of Walter de la Mare, to whom he's frequently compared. Both authors skillfully avoided overt explanations, leaving readers to grapple with a haunting sense of mystery long after the tale's conclusion. This is especially true in Ringing the Changes, where the terrifying, awakening dead are never directly seen. Aikman's brilliance lies in evoking their presence through every sense except sight, immersing readers in an atmosphere of dread. When adapting Ring the Changes for television, the production faced challenges right from the start. The title itself was a point of contention, with BBC head of plays Gerald Savary declaring it unsuitable for the horror audience. Despite his concerns, the story was greenlit and the adaptation was entrusted to the gifted Hugh Whitemore, known for his work on 30-Minute Theatre and Londoners. Whitemore's adaptation of Ringing the Changes stays remarkably true to the spirit of Robert Aikman's original tale. The script captures the oblique, eerie tone of the narrative while weaving in some unforgettable imagery.
I knew Aikman's work a little.
Whitemore reflected.
I had also admired Jonathan Miller's wonderful film based on the M.R. James story, Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad. The best ghost story ever filmed in my opinion, and I hoped I had achieved the same sort of weird, poetic ambiguity.
This inspiration is evident throughout Whitemore's work. The script emphasises the bleak and desolate East Anglia shoreline setting, a detail that echoes the striking cinematography of Miller's omnibus presentation. Whitemore also incorporates Aikman's evocative metaphors directly into the script, lending the adaptation an atmospheric depth. These include the haunting description of the sleeping Fryn as looking strangely ethereal, like a dead girl in a painting by Millais, and the unsettling comparison of the deafening pealing bells to plunging, roaring lions. Such details highlight Whitemore's reverence for Aikman's storytelling. However, Whitemore faced frustrations during the production process, particularly with the decision to change the story's title. BBC head of plays, Gerald Savory, demanded a more attention-grabbing title to appeal to horror viewers. Whitemore recalled his dismay.
I thought The Bells of Hell was a cheap, vulgar, and dumbing down title for what I still think of as a strange and subtle story. I much preferred ringing the changes. I forget who thought of the new title. It may have been the story editor Richard Davis. It certainly seemed silly to muck about with the title of a 30-minute story that would be screened very late, as the size of the audience must have been minuscule. I didn't approve at all, and I remember arguments, which, of course, I eventually lost.
Surviving records reveal that 60s icon Marianne Faithfull was originally considered for the role of Fryn. The casting process was even delayed for a time as the production team awaited Faithfull's decision. Ultimately, though, the role went to a young Michelle Detrice. At the time, Detrice was building a solid reputation through notable television credits, including Rudolph Cartier's celebrated Out of the Unknown adaptation of Mordecai Rochwald's Level 7, and of course the anthology series Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which we looked at the beginning of this programme, where she played a semi-regular character called Vicky Crabb, no relation. Interestingly, her father, actor Roy Detrice, had stepped into the same studio just a week earlier to star in The Kiss of Blood, but more on that later. The role of Gerald Banstead was awarded to Ronald Hines, a talented character actor known for his versatility in both comedic and dramatic roles. His comedic prowess was showcased in Tell It to the Marines from 1959 to 1960 and the first series of The Marriage Lines in 1963. On the dramatic side, Hines earned recognition as Derek Prentice in the early seasons of Mogul, later retitled The Troubleshooters, as well as for his role in The Tunnel Under the World, a standout episode of the wonderful Out of the Unknown series. Check my reviews on that if you haven't already. With casting complete, location filming began in the picturesque town of Wivenhoe, Essex, situated on the banks of the River Colne. Director Naomi Capon selected the area for its expansive mudflats and salt marshes at low tide, an atmospheric backdrop perfect for Holly Haven, where the story's set. The production's evocative atmosphere didn't go unnoticed. Shortly after its broadcast, the Sunday Telegraph praised the play for its chilling execution, noting that it
came closer than anything recently to fulfilling the proper requirements of a ghost story.
The review highlighted the story's disquieting atmosphere and its climax, where
the dead awoke to go dancing and chanting through the streets.
The play's East Anglian coastal setting was likened to the haunting locales of M.R. James, while comparisons were drawn to Jonathan Miller's Freudian approach in Whistle and I'll Come to You. Critics were quick to single out the closing moments of the play for their audaciously provocative sexual tone. One reviewer applauded its boldness, highlighting the
note of erotic equivocation, as Miss Detrice, eyeing some vaguely familiar gravediggers, licked little pink tongue around little pink lips.
It's a striking and ambiguous conclusion, perfectly encapsulating the unsettling mix of allure and unease that defines the story. When BBC One transitioned to colour, broadcasting in November 1969, The Bells of Hell was given a rare repeat airing on Friday, December the 5th. This screening was part of a staggered rerun of the entire late-night horror series, which concluded in March 1970. Unfortunately, like so many television treasures of its time, the 2-inch quad master tape of The Bells of Hell was later wiped, leaving the play to fade into obscurity. For years, it lived on only in the memories of those who had been fortunate enough to see it. However, Aikman's haunting tale hasn't been entirely forgotten, because in October of 2000, the BBC revisited Ringing the Changes with an expertly crafted radio play. This adaptation perfectly captured the story's dark and claustrophobic atmosphere. The radio version boasted an impressive cast, including George Baker as Gerald Banstead and Barbara Shelley, yet another lost gem with only the sound effect tapes in existence. Sad that. For the final episode in the series of Late Night Horror, a classic Conan Doyle story of cuckolded retribution was given the late night horror treatment. The renowned London surgeon Douglas Stone is lured by his infatuation with the beautiful yet morally ambiguous Lady Sannox. Ignoring the warnings of scandal and whispers about her destructive allure, Stone allows himself to become ensnared in her orbit. One fateful night, he is summoned by a desperate Turkish nobleman to perform a critical operation under mysterious and urgent circumstances. Promised a fortune and tantalized by the secrecy, Stone complies, only to find himself in the grip of a macabre twist. As his scalpel pierces flesh, the horrifying truth unfolds. A chilling punishment devised for Stone's arrogance and his sins. Poor Lady Sannox, surgically mutilated, and she didn't have to go to Turkey for the privilege. The Kiss of Blood, luridly retitled from the more conservative The Case of Lady Sannox, was written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. As mentioned before, Sir Arthur wrote some decent macabre yarns for the thrill-seeking Victorian middle-classer in his time. The Case of Lady Sannox first saw print in the illustrated monthly magazine The Idler in the November of 1893. A time of titvers, muffs, and where ladies of the night charged twopence a trick, or free of charge, being grateful just for the warm drink. Before the late-night horror treatment, Lady Sannox cropped up on TV in an episode of Suspense for the American audiences of 1949, but added a caught-by-the-fuzz ending and avoided any Kensington gore. For late-night horror, it was up to screenwriter John Hawksworth to revise this spiteful period piece for the small screen. Hawksworth later went on to bring us the celebrated period piece of television, Upstairs Downstairs. Hawksworth tweaked a few changes for this version from Sir Arthur's short, and he appreciated the 25-minute format for this particular teleplay. But despite a quality script from Hawksworth, story editor Richard Davis raised an eyebrow. Davis liked late-night horror, in its current format, to build up to the climax quite rapidly, but with this story, now known as The Kiss of Blood, the narrative took place over a couple of weeks. Davis mused that concerning The Kiss of Blood,
the action of the adaptation, not the original story, does take place over a period of weeks, and the scenes are deliberately short and sketchy, so that the impact of the denouement is that much greater. However, this is the exception, and apart from Diane Salento's lovely performance, I'm afraid this may be the least successful.
For the story, the bane of copyright wasn't an issue for the BBC. You see, the producer of Late Night Horror, Harry Moore, had done such a sterling job with the BBC's adaptations of Conan Doyle's stories for the Conan Doyle series, which the BBC screened in 66 and 67, something, dear viewer, we will never get to see, that Sir Arthur's estate were more than happy to realise this tale. They only requested one stipulation, that the words, based on a story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, had its own standalone caption, and naturally, the production obliged. Director Richard Martin went behind the lens. It was Martin who also spearheaded the casting and chose Diane Cilento as his leading lady for The Kiss of Blood. Cilento was very well known by now, praised for her Academy Award-nominated role as Molly Seagrim in the bawdy Tom Jones film from 1963, and of course being Sean Connery's wife, in my opinion, the definitive James Bond. For the male lead of infatuated academic surgeon Douglas Stone, the plum part went to Roy Dotrice, almost crossing paths with his daughter Michelle on set for late night horror as she commenced working on The Bells of Hell immediately after this production was in the can. Cilento and Dotrice got on very well indeed, spending time playing basketball in the rehearsal hall, where Dotrice admits Cilento often thrashed him. It would be remiss of Connery not to be mentioned, so the Radio Times TV guide stirred up the sensational when it declared that Sean Connery could be seen visibly blanching at some of the horrific content of the story, especially the brutal mutilation of his wife. Connery and comedian Eric Sykes were regular visitors to the production, and director Richard Martin recalled how both Connery and Sykes would sit on the floor, sharing a bottle of whiskey, commenting how slightly gross this episode was. Dotrice, by 1968, a seasoned actor of stage and screen, recalled how he blushed when Connery had visited the set another time, this time on the set of The Boudoir. Dotrice remembered,
"It was one of the first dramas to be broadcast in colour, and we had great problems getting the makeup right. The makeup artists had to use tons of it to make sure the natural red in our complexions didn't burn through. After we had finished our last rehearsal for cameras, we had a break before recording. I asked Diane if she wanted to go to the restaurant for an early dinner. She said no, as she wanted a shower, and would I be kind enough to order food for two to be delivered to her room. The food was delivered and I took it into Diane's room. She was in the dressing area having her shower. I sat and waited for her. Suddenly, the door opened and in strode James Bond. And there was I, waiting for his wife to come out of the shower. It was a tremendous relief that when she did emerge into the dining area she was wearing a dressing gown. I think that was the reason my complexion was so red before the recording."
The Kiss of Blood finally wrapped up production, a few delays, a few hiccups with the new colour technology, but virtually hassle-free. It was first broadcast on BBC Two in colour on Friday the 24th of May 1968, and despite reservations from the story editor, it achieved the highest audience appreciation for the series. Audience feedback had one viewer delighted by Cilento's performance, calling her a
voluptuous and self-indulgent mistress,
and also praise for Dotrice as well in the role of the infatuated lover, and especially at the finale, where one viewer said he showed
great delirium at the end, still clutching a piece of his mistress's lip.
A few viewers did comment on the gore for this story. One said the scene where Lady Sannox is sliced orally was
an impressive and terrible sight,
especially as they saw it in colour. A few were relieved they saw it in black and white, as the new medium of colour would have amplified the splatter quotient on display. A critic for the Sunday Telegraph, reviewing The Kiss of Blood just after its broadcast, said that it
culminated in another easily bought thrill, being the particularly revolting mutilation of Diane Cilento at the instigation of the jealous husband, played by Charles Workman. The reaction was a very loud
The Kiss of Blood was rebroadcast on BBC One on December the 12th, 1969, to reach a new colour TV audience, hoping they could revel in revulsion once again for the new kids on the block. However, we will never get to see Cilento's Crimson Kisser being surgically savaged, as his tale remains to be missing from the archives entirely. Another gem of the archives and our heritage irretrievably lost. Another great shame, as this particular story seemed decadently repellent. And there we have it, dear viewer. Late night horror. A significant milestone for the BBC in many ways. Unfortunately, as far as I know, this series was never exported, and the chances of any episodes existing in the hands of a private collector seem very slim indeed. The sole exception might be the Triumph of Death, though even that remains uncertain due to the lack of solid evidence. Exploring this missing series has been an interesting journey, and I hope you don't mind the use of AI in piecing it together. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I truly enjoyed experimenting with it nevertheless, trying to imagine these lost treasures with the little information available, primarily Radio Times listings and details from similar productions. Talk about working with a blank canvas, bloody hell. For those who want a taste of what late night horror might have been like, a few of the missing episodes have been narrated as plays or reading the actual stories themselves, and can be found on YouTube. One of its stories, No Such Thing as a Vampire, was even adapted into the 1977 anthology film Dead of Night. These clips I included for the opening review of that particular story. I was also lucky to chance upon a photo from the production of No Such Thing as a Vampire, which I haven't seen before, so thought would share it with you. While all these fragments give us a glimpse, there's still nothing quite like experiencing the original series itself, is there? Still, it's been a pleasure diving into this piece of lost television history with you. Late night horror was classy. It was brave, pioneering. It pushed the boundaries in the sex and sadism stakes at times and seemed to love splashing the claret. Sporting prestigious writers, authors, screenwriters, actors and directors of the time, so God only knows why it was never preserved as an example of one of the first colour series for the BBC. That I find bloody frustrating. I hope this little documentary keeps it alive for many years to come. Well, thank you for indulging me. A belated Happy New Year from your Crabster to all of you, one and all. Until next time on Look Look and Look Again. Cheerio.
Yeah.